Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. I am very sorry that I could not be there in person, but I am deeply honored to be part of this important event on behalf of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, where I serve as a commissioner. On behalf of my colleagues at the Commission, I'd like to send our warm regards to Archbishop Angelos and the Bishop of Truro, and thank you very much to you both for convening this event today. USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan advisory body that monitors religious freedom worldwide, using international standards and make policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. USCIRF has 9 commissioners appointed by the President and congressional leadership from both political parties. USCIRF is separate from the State Department, but works very closely with the Office of International Religious Freedom and Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. USCIRF, the Ambassador at Large position, the State Department's Religious Freedom Office, and Senior Advisor position at the White House were all created over 20 years ago by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, commonly known as IRFA. USCIRF commissioners come from different political parties, different faiths, different professional backgrounds, and different parts of the United States. Yet we all agree on certain things. This includes the importance of freedom of religion or belief for everyone, everywhere, and need to shine a light on the severe abuses so many individuals of all faiths and of none suffer for exercising their right to freedom of religion or belief. USCIRF recently released our 2021 annual report, which details religious freedom conditions during 2020 in 26 countries, focusing on the world's worst violators of religious freedom. During 2020, USCIRF was concerned by several governments whose actions met our statutory reporting threshold of systematic, ongoing, and egregious religious freedom violations. We continue to be deeply concerned, for example, with religious freedom violations in India, and to recommend the State Department to designate it as a country of particular concern, or CPC, under IRFA, despite the strong US-India bilateral relationship. The Indian government has continued to target Muslims through the Discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA. At the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, the disinformation and hateful rhetoric, including from government officials, often disparaged religious minorities, continuing familiar patterns. Disinformation and intolerant content have emboldened intimidation, harassment, and mob violence in recent years, including numerous instances of violence mainly against Dalits, Muslims, Christians, Adivasis, and other religious communities. The Russian government in 2020 brought 188 criminal cases against Jehovah's Witnesses, who were banned as an extremist group in 2017. Raids and interrogation included instances of torture that continued to go uninvestigated and unpunished. In the North Caucasus, security forces acted with impunity, arresting or kidnapping persons suspected of even tangential links to Islamist militant groups, as well as for secular political opposition. The government of Iran escalated its repression of religious minorities in 2020, confiscating Baha'i land in the village of Ivel and forcing Baha'is to register as Muslims as a condition for receiving a national ID card. Several Muslims converted to Christianity were arrested, assaulted, and sentenced to years in prison. Women who dissented from the government's unique religious interpretation of Shia Islam faced jail time and inadequate access to medical care. The Iranian government also announced it would sponsor for the 3rd time a Holocaust denial cartoon contest. The government of Saudi Arabia continued in 2020 to deny public freedom of worship to non-Muslims. It arrested 3 people for insulting God on social media and continued to detain peaceful activists who dissented from the government's singular interpretation of Sunni Islam. Saudi Arabia also maintained key provisions of its guardianship system, which prevent women from legal adulthood and allows abusive male guardians to procure Saudi state resources to force a female ward to return home. This power extends over women who have fled internationally or who are escaping domestic violence. Religious freedom violations in China and the Chinese Communist Party's extension of its influence far beyond its borders represented the most troubling developments in 2020. CCP's increasing hostility towards religion has resulted in campaign to synthesize Islam, Tibetan Buddhists, and Christianity, rid the religion of alleged foreign influences. In the Xinjiang region that the Uyghur people call East Turkestan, the CCP's campaign has translated into mass atrocities against Turkic Muslim minorities, and in particular, the Uyghur people. We were therefore in full support of the State Department's decision in January of this year to designate China's treatment of the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in the region as a genocide and crimes against humanity. China's growing overseas influence and activities also negatively affected religious freedom and other human rights far beyond its borders. The CCP government has exercised its broad economic and geopolitical influence to pressure foreign countries near and far to accept its demands without concern for human rights. Chinese government also exerted pressure on international companies, including American businesses, to disregard human rights abuses in and international scrutiny over their operations in China. It also expanded efforts to weaken and subvert the international human rights system and norms within the United Nations. Such efforts could have far-reaching implications around the world, particularly in countries and regions where authoritarian regimes suppress human rights and religious freedom. Pursuant to our statutory mandate, our annual report is focused on providing policy recommendations to the United States President, Secretary of State, and Congress. However, given the alarming scale of global assault on religious freedom, unilateral action is not enough. The United States must work alongside like-minded partners to protect the freedom of religion or belief. As we gather here on the margins of the G7, I'd like to highlight some of our recommendations where there are opportunities for collective actions by G7 members. First, we recommend the Biden administration to prioritize freedom of religion or belief in the United States' renewed engagement with the United Nations human rights system. G7 should stand together as a firm voice to protect religious freedom at the UN and to counter efforts to undermine that system by states that egregiously violate religious freedom and other human rights. As part of these multilateral efforts, we also encourage the Biden administration to continue its leadership in the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, which is a network of like-minded governments committed to opposing religious persecution and advancing freedom of religion or belief for all. 32 countries, including the United Kingdom, have signed on the Alliance's Declaration of Principles, which is grounded in international human rights standards. We encourage other members of the G7 to join this alliance and work within this network to collectively advance freedom of religion or belief, including at the UN. G7 members also continue to participate in future ministerials to advance religious freedom. Following two US-hosted ministerials in 2018 and 2019, a virtual ministerial hosted by Poland in 2020, Brazil will host the fourth ministerial later this year, and the United Kingdom is expected to host in 2022. Another area where more coordinated action by the G7 is needed is human rights-related targeted sanctions. In our reports, we call on the United States government to increase the use of human rights-related financial and visa authorities to impose consequences on individuals and entities for severe religious freedom violations. These targeted sanctions promote accountability when imposed alongside complementary action by other countries. In addition to demonstrating a unified front, coordinated sanctions are most successful in disrupting access to the international financial system for human rights violations. In March, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and EU imposed targeted sanctions on two top Chinese officials for egregious religious freedom violations against Uyghurs and other Muslims in China. These coordinated sanctions sent an unmistakably clear message to the Chinese Communist Party that the international community will not tolerate its repressive, genocidal policies in the Uyghur region. Thank you again for inviting me to join you today. I look forward to working with you in the advancement of international religious freedom.